Welcome to Auto Mundial, the weekly car news and review show where this week we pit the Porsche Panamera Sport Turismo against the mighty Audi RS6. We also have a pickup from Mitsubishi as well as an electric SUV from Mercedes.
And in this week's Deep Drive, we review the latest Skoda Octavia. That is all coming up. First though, the news.
British sports car manufacturer Lotus has announced that it will be axing all of its current lineup from production this year. The surprising news comes as the newly refurbished factory in Hethel, Norfolk, gets ready to start production of the new Type 131, which will take design inspiration from the electric Evija hypercar, currently in development. The Elise, XCEED and Evora will all make way for new models expected in the near future, with Lotus confirming that it will be hiring a further 250 staff members. To date, Lotus has sold a combined total of 55,000 Elise, XCEED and Evora models, with a much-loved Elise now in its third generation since hitting the market in 1996. Since then, Lotus has stuck to its founder Colin Chapman's philosophy of simplify, then add lightness, something we hope continues as the Geely-owned brand enters a new era.
It seems we've had a flurry of all-electric SUVs lately. The e-tron was Audi's first EV, and the Jaguar I-Pace has been busy winning just about every motoring award going. Now though, it's Mercedes' turn with this, the EQC. A good-looking car, we're sure you'll agree. The EQC represents the start of the Daimler Group's EV offensive. At first glance, it may appear to be just a regular GLC, but look closer and you'll start to notice some of the Mercedes EQ range's signature details. There are some fibre optic strips of lighting, a smooth front grille panel, and a solid light bar across the boot lid that seems to have been pinched from Porsche. Overall though, it's a pretty conventional SUV shape, much more so than a Tesla Model X or a Jaguar I-Pace, something which Mercedes hopes will win buyers who want a proper Merc without shouting about its electric credentials. It's a similar story inside too, where anyone who's ever travelled in a modern Mercedes will feel immediately at home. There are no TV-sized touchscreens or gull-wing doors to swoon over. Instead, it's all very normal. In fact, the only real differences from a regular Mercedes interior are some different air vents, some tasteful copper accents, and a sweeping panel running from the doors to the back of the dashboard. The dual-screen infotainment system is a regular feature throughout the brand's lineup, while the build quality and options all remain typically Mercedes. Sadly though, it isn't particularly spacious for such a large car, with poor rear headroom and a bulky centre console eating into space up front. Visibility's not great either, with slim side windows and a raked rear windscreen. Powering the EQC is an 85 kilowatt battery hooked up to two electric motors producing 402 brake horsepower. That power is sent to all four wheels, resulting in a 0 to 62 time of just 5.1 seconds. Not bad for a 2.5-ton SUV, although top speed is capped at 112 miles per hour.
On the road, it feels largely the same as any other electric SUV. That's to say, it feels every bit as heavy as it is. It's certainly not a car you want to push in the corners. Poke the throttle though, and that instant hit of torque is addictive. It's very much a point-and-shoot sort of car, with endless straight-line grunt on offer. According to the rigorous WLTP tests, the EQC is capable of travelling up to 259 miles on a single charge, making it a perfectly feasible everyday car for most drivers. It even has a maximum range mode, which makes use of onboard cameras to monitor the road ahead and assist the driver to eke out as many miles as possible. To be honest though, it can get a little annoying with constant inputs and alerts from the car telling you what to do. For us then, it just doesn't impress us as much as some of its rivals. The Audi e-tron gets way more impressive tech and can be plugged into more powerful and faster chargers, while the Jaguar I-Pace is better to drive thanks to its much lower curb weight and better driving position. To our eyes, the Jag is the best looking too, and we love its minimalist interior.
So while the Mercedes EQC is a fine electric SUV, it's far from the obvious choice.
And now, time on Auto Mundial Deep Drive as we look at Skoda's latest Octavia.
This is the all-new Skoda Octavia. Excited? Maybe not. But the Octavia has always been a car that's been well respected by the motoring media and well liked by owners, but it's never really been a car that can turn heads. But this car does look a bit smarter than before. Gone are those slightly odd split headlights from the previous car, and the back looks sharper as well. In a world where people are moving away from hatchbacks and saloons into crossovers and SUVs, style could be an issue. But how much does that really matter if this new Octavia is still one of the greatest family cars around? Image is not the only issue for the Octavia. Another is understanding its relative size and where exactly it sits in the Skoda range, as well as in the market as a whole. The Octavia was recently joined by the Scala, a car that now competes more directly with models like the Seat Leon and the Volkswagen Golf. The Scala is noticeably shorter than the Octavia but has an almost identical sized cabin at the cost of some boot space. Above the Octavia is the Superb, which is slightly longer. It has a similar sized boot but more cabin space, mainly for rear seat passengers. But the Octavia has long been seen as a more practical alternative to the evergreen Golf, despite the Skoda's generous proportions. The two cars share a platform and boast many of the same engines. They even cost roughly the same amount of money. And if you consider a car that conventionally sits in the class above, like the Peugeot 508 perhaps, you can see exactly why the Octavia is considered the big family hatchback. Few people will need a more expensive car than the Octavia when you look at the space and technology on offer. It's up here where you'll find most of the Octavia's tech. So this is the SEL first edition model, so you've got virtual cockpit dials, a 10-inch touchscreen with wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto and SatNav, but our car has also got a head-up display which works really well and means you don't have to take your eyes too far off the road if you want to see things like your speed. Taking a seat in the back highlights one of the Octavia's biggest strengths, and that is that it's absolutely huge back here. It feels much more like a saloon than one of the hatchbacks on which this car is based. The Octavia's boot is a real plus point. You've got 600 litres to play with back here, which is pretty much bigger than anything in this class.
Join us again after the break as we check out Porsche's attempt at a fast family estate.
Still to come, Porsche versus Audi. But first, part 2 of our Skoda Octavia Deep Drive.
There are two versions of the 2-litre diesel engine available, and this is the more powerful one. It returns 62.1 mpg with CO2 emissions of 119 grams per kilometre and can do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 8.7 seconds. A 113 brake horsepower version of the same engine is good for 65.5 mpg, 113 grams per kilometre, and is around £2,000 less to buy. Alternatively, there are two petrol engines on offer. A 108 brake horsepower 1 litre claims official economy of 54.7 mpg with CO2 emissions of 117 grams per kilometre. It's capable of 0 to 62 miles an hour in 10.8 seconds. The other choice, a 1.5 litre petrol engine with 148 brake horsepower, is better suited to a car of this size, getting the Octavia from 0 to 62 miles an hour in 8.2 seconds. Economy only slips to 50.7 mpg with CO2 emissions of 127 grams per kilometre. But like the more powerful diesel, it costs around £2,000 more. Plug-in hybrid and higher power VRS models are on the way, and there's a more practical estate model if you want even more space. Our car has the 2-litre turbo diesel engine with 148 brake horsepower mated to the VW Group's 7-speed DSG, and it is perfectly suited to long motorway journeys. There's enough power for overtaking and accelerating on slip roads, and the engine feels well within itself at a cruise. Which engine you go for will depend largely on the type of driving you do. If you end up in town most of the time and you do less than 12,000 miles a year, one of the petrols is probably a better bet. The ride is fantastic. The steering, it's a bit lifeless, and the gearbox a touch lazy. But if you ever want the Octavia to be a bit more responsive, you just flip the car through to sport mode, where the car holds onto gears a bit longer and is less reluctant to change down. Whichever engine you go for, the Octavia is a comfortable, predictable car to drive.
These days there are few options for those who prefer old-school engineering. With almost all manufacturers doing everything possible to improve fuel economy and reduce emissions, it seems that there's no longer a place for thirsty, heavy vehicles. Thankfully though, there's one bastion of grunt, heft and charm left in the showrooms, and that's pickup trucks. While their SUV cousins have moved to unibody constructions and hybrid power plants, most pickups still offer the classic combination of a big diesel engine atop a traditional ladder frame chassis. Their market share may be limited, but trucks like this, the latest Mitsubishi L200, show they won't be leaving us anytime soon. Now in its 6th generation, the new L200 aims to build on the success of previous versions with a bold new look and a host of extra luxuries. While the old truck was hugely popular, it was often criticised for looking a little tame compared with some of its rivals. Well, the same certainly can't be said of this new one. From any angle it looks great, with modern creases and that massive new face. Despite its eye-catching styling though, it does share much of its underpinnings with the outgoing model. Much of the chassis is carried over along with bits of the interior. What this new truck does get though is a new downsized engine. Sadly, even the timeless L200 is not exempt from emissions requirements, meaning the old 178 brake horsepower unit has been replaced with a smaller 2.3 litre diesel, putting out just 148. There's a decent amount of torque though, so getting up to speed isn't much of an issue, with performance on par with rivals from Nissan and Toyota. Head off on the smooth tarmac and the L200 really comes into its own. It gets some heavy-duty double wishbone front suspension, plenty of underbody protection, hill descent control and off-road driving modes on higher spec models.
But the L200 faces some stiff competition, not least the Nissan Navara. Like the Mitsubishi, the Nissan aims to win buyers away from bland SUVs with its combination of muscular looks and go-anywhere ability. Crucially though, Nissan has paid great attention to the interior. While the kit list isn't much different from the Mitsubishis, it gets a smarter, more car-like interior with many parts borrowed from the X-Trail. On the road though, it doesn't feel quite as polished as the L200. The steering is vague and the body roll is immense. It doesn't ride as well either, and despite its more powerful engines, it still doesn't feel any quicker.
In conclusion then, it looks like another success story for Mitsubishi's evergreen pickup. With its handsome looks and ability to match, this is the new one-ton truck to beat.
The Panamera. Porsche's idea of a four-door saloon car has always left us feeling a little cold. It's a great car, of course, but it somehow lacked the drama and style of some of its more conventional three-box competitors. This, however, is the Porsche Panamera Sport Turismo. And straight away, it stands out. The extended roofline suits the car brilliantly and makes us wonder if this is how the Panamera should always have looked. There is a small premium to pay over the saloon car, about £2,000, but this is a much more practical choice than the regular car. There's more headroom in the back, and of course the boot is bigger, although perhaps not by as much as you'd think. We suspect, though, that the boot capacity isn't at the forefront of most Porsche buyers' minds. Instead, they'll be more interested in the performance. The Sport Turismo follows roughly the same selection of powertrain options as the saloon, starting off with the £75,000 325 brake horsepower 4. The 4S uses the same 3-litre V6 as the 4, but power is upped to just over 430, with the 0 to 62 time dropping by about a second to 4.3. Also on offer is a selection of plug-in hybrid models. The entry-level 4E hybrid makes use of the aforementioned V6 paired up to an electric motor for a combined total output of 456 horsepower, but the fastest hybrid on offer is the mighty Turbo S E-Hybrid. This time the electric motor is hooked up to a twin turbocharged V8 to produce an intoxicating 690 brake horsepower. The results are 0 to 62 in 3.2 seconds and a top speed of 196. However, the fastest Panamera on offer is the Turbo S. This makes do without the hybrid gubbins, instead using the 4-litre V8, this time tuned up to 621 brake horsepower. It may be down on power versus the E-hybrid, but it's lighter and shaves off 1/10 of a second on the 0 to 60 sprint.
But if Porsche wants to infiltrate the fast estate car market, it needs to beat this, the king of practical performance, the Audi RS6. The RS6 uses a version of the same V8 found in the Porsche, this time producing 592 horsepower. 0 to 62 is dealt with in just 3.6 seconds, making this big estate car a match for many modern supercars. Top speed is limited to 155, but for a bit of extra cash, Audi will take away the limiter, letting you hit 189 miles per hour. But look closely, and that isn't all that surprising. All that torque is fed through an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission driving all 4 wheels. There's a very clever sport differential divvying it up between all the fronts and rears, meaning there's always going to be plenty of grip, and as you gain speed, the optional air suspension automatically lowers the car, helping to keep it flat in the corners. It sounds like an absolute animal then, but Audi insists that this is still a usable, everyday family car. For starters, this is actually a hybrid, sort of. It uses the familiar 48-volt mild hybrid setup that we've seen in other big Audis, allowing for quieter stop-starts and better fuel economy. To further improve that, the RS6 also features cylinder deactivation, allowing half of the cylinders to shut down when on a cruise. Inside, it's just as impressive, if a little more conventional. There are a few fancy RS bits, like the sport seats trimmed in Napa leather and Alcantara, and a special steering wheel with aluminium gearshift paddles. But it's otherwise a standard A6 cabin, and that is no bad thing. It perhaps doesn't feel quite as special as the Porsche's cabin, but the fit and finish is just as good.
If you're after a fast car, the Panamera Sport Turismo is superb. But if you're after a fast estate car, it's the Audi that makes the most sense. Its extra practicality makes it a great everyday car, and still our favourite fast family car.
Join us again next week on Auto Mundial as we look at an all-new EV from BMW, the iX3.